folks. Okay, let's begin. When I was a child, one of the most oft-borrowed books from my school library had a cover of Gary Gablich flying down the salt flats in the blue flame. Little did I know that before and since that day in 1970, there was a deep history of the many who journeyed and continued to trek out to this dry lake bed about 100 miles west of Salt Lake City, to the Wrigley Field of Landspeed, where women and men became the Chuck Yeager of the land. Now, thanks to Louise Ann Noeth, or Landspeed Louise as many know her, we can see how that history developed via her words and numerous photos she compiled in her wonderful Arcadia publishing book, Bonneville Salt Flats. Welcome, Louise. To moderate this evening, I am pleased to introduce Harold Osmer. Harold is an award-winning author of 3 books about Southern California auto racing history. Harold has emceed car shows, announced in Irwindale, Speedway, and Bonneville. And he's produced multiple videos about auto racing, car reviews, and other speed-related topics. He's produced the annual Turkey Night Grand Program for 20 years running, and Harold's cars in anger set foot in all 50 states and served aboard a nuclear submarine. His days are largely spent now in his wood shop. Take it away, Harold, and hello, Louise.
Thank you, Michael.
Hello. And thanks, Mike, for having us.
Yep. Well, Michael, you did a good job of introducing Louise for us there. She's from Chicago. She currently lives in the Midwest. Chicago itself has some interesting ties to land speed that don't always seem obvious thinking the Midwest. We can maybe talk about that a little bit later. Louise has written multiple articles, and she's worked with Team Vesco, Breed, Love, Fawcett, and let's just start talking and we'll get to it. Landspeed Louise, how are you, my dear?
I'm doing just great. I'm just doing wonderful. Thanks. And I appreciate you doing this, Harold.
Well, sure. Well, as we were talking a little bit earlier, in our history, our personal history goes back about 20 to 25 years, and you've always been involved in this. To start off with, if you're looking at a map, where are the Bonneville Salt Flats?
So look at the map of the U.S. and figure out your interstate. Look at Interstate 80. When Interstate 80 goes across Utah, just at the border of Utah and Nevada, right there, if you were to stop, screech, hit the brakes, and look north, then north and a little east, that's exactly where the Bonneville Salt Flats are. At least the International Speedway.
Sure. So why are the salt flats there?
That's all geological. A bazillion years ago, probably about, 15-some thousand, the mountains rose up from the western seaboard, from the Pacific Ocean, if you will, and they trapped part of the Pacific Ocean inland. And this is all part of the tectonic plate shift and when the Earth was figuring out, how it wanted to dance. So this got trapped with the mountains, and there's no freshwater feed at all. Nothing. The only fresh water that comes down is from the sky. So there was this trapped salt lake, if you will. I mean, it was a huge thing. It was about 475 miles long by about, I'm going to say about 200 miles wide. And then a series of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and things like that. Little things, big things. Eventually, there were little ruptures in the mountain range, a little bit of water left, and another piece of water left over a period of time. And if you look at pictures of Bonneville, you'll see the mountains, but look for the horizontal lines. And those horizontal lines are not what you would consider sedimentary.
Right.
They're seashores. They're the different main seashores. And if you march up there, you will find seashells.
Okay, so why are they called the Bonneville Salt Flats?
Oh, well, now that's
who was Bonneville?
That's American history. So back in the days when fur trading and trapping was a big deal, and most of, quote, America was located at the Mississippi River or east, there was the exploration. And there was a fellow by the name of Benjamin Bonneville. He ended up being the longest serving gentleman in the United States Army. I don't think anybody's beat his record yet. And he was put on an assignment surreptitiously by the US government, but on the face of it, he was looking for new avenues for fur trapping and for trading, and just to expand the wealth and the capitalism of the very foundling U.S. company.
Sure.
So he had a bunch of lieutenants that he would send out. He set up camp in a certain spot, and then he'd send them out. You go there, you go here, and come back and report to me. Well, one of the guys who, when he went and found and cleared the mountain range and saw the Bonneville Salt Flats, and I don't care whether it was back in the 1800s or today, the first time you lay eyes on the Bonneville Salt Flats, you kind of stop for a moment and consider just how teeny weeny you are. Anyway, when this fellow saw Bonneville, he was so taken that he decided that this place needed to be named the Bonneville Salt Flats after the boss, after the guy that was employing him to be this big time scout. And in fact, that's how it became known as the Bonneville Salt Flats.
Oh, terrific, terrific. Well, looking through your book, and by the way, let me hold this one up. This is Arcadia Publishing puts out these kind of books, and they're mostly, I want to say, picture books with extended captions to explain what the things are about. And they're largely regional. Your book is laid out, makes sense, in chronological order. We've covered much of the geologic sort of buildup to it. But you say that in and around 1915, give or take, people started showing up and trying to drive fast on this because it was a hard packed surface. Can you tell us a little bit about that era and how people found that?
Well, it started a little bit before then. And think about it. Bonneville racing sort of came into the vogue about the same time cars came into vogue. And the area of Bonneville and the Salt Flats, while it was hard and it was flat, it was also a trading station. The word "wend over" is a two-part thing. It says the folks with goats and sheep and things like that, the traders, they would wend their way over the mountains and come to be in this spot, and other people would come over with their stuff, and then they would trade and barter and carry over.
And that's the name of the town that's right there now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And it was also one of the places where you could get across the Salt Flats without trying to chisel your way through.
Sure.
So it essentially, people came, and it was this great place because, remember, there were no roads. They were making the roads back then.
Right.
And that's what the AAA started to do, is literally lay out roads and the interstate highway system that we know today. So Salt Lake was a developing city, and they had these various things that they would do with rodeos. They called them automotive polo. One of the fellows, his name was Jenkins, wanted to see a prize fight that was supposed to take place in Salt Lake, but got taken into Reno and then was in California. Anyway, it was a big deal, this prize fight, and he was determined to see it. So he got on a Henderson or an Excelsior? I think it's the Excelsior. And he got on his bike in Salt Lake City, went all the way across the state, and then essentially just about across Nevada, following either the support roads for the railroad or on the railroad itself. Now imagine that on a bike for about 20 hours, okay? When he got to Bonneville, he went off on the Bonneville Salt Flats, and it was the smoothest thing he'd ever seen. And he thought, oh my goodness. And it was a few years later, that was about 1911, I think it was, or 1918. Anyway, right in those teen years, I'd have to look it up to be good at it. He came back, and Jenkins went on to be probably what I call the father of the salt. He came back with the Studebaker, with the Duesenberg, with the Pierce Arrow, Let's just say that there are still records that this man set out there in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s that have
Right.
not been broken, may never be broken. He was probably more proud of the fact that he had driven 1,000,000 miles on the roads and never had an accident. He was more happy with that. Yeah, 1,000,000 miles.
So,
So he was really good at it. So that's how it all kind of got to be.
sure,
Is
okay.
because
So
of
who was Teddy Tetzlaff, and why is there a Tetzlaff Peak out there?
Okay, so yeah, all of the mountains, well, not all, but many of them have names. One is Campbell, one is Jenkins, one is Tetzlaff. Teddy Tetzlaff was the guy that was driving the Blitzen Benz, which at that time was the nastiest, hottest hot rod out there. It was owned by a fellow by the name of Ernie Morass. He was a promoter. There were a number of other cars that came out there, Chalmers and Macwells and things like that. And he was driving this thing. They all timed those cars with stopwatches. So it was done by tenths of a second. And they took this thing out there. Oh, and by the way, as we know today, you know, the trailers and tractors come in and they unload the cars and poof, we have a race, no matter what you're going to race. There was no road.
Right.
The only way to get the race cars to Bonneville was on the railroad track. So they had to convince the Denver and Rio Grande Railway to have a special excursion train out to Bonneville from Salt Lake. And the railroad folks said, nope, not unless you sell at least 150 tickets. Well, they stopped selling tickets, I think, at about 225. The excursion train went out. They offloaded all the cars and people, and off went these cars to essentially history, which is why we're having this conversation today. But Tetzlaff, essentially right off the train, went faster than any other car had ever gone anywhere on the planet, including when Barney Oldfield, who was the big guy of the day,
Master driver of the world.
He blew him away.
Yeah.
And so that kind of put Bonneville on the map.
So how does the salt surface compare to the sands of, say, Daytona?
Traction.
Because other land speed records were set on the hard packed beaches with the big tides that would go out, and so you could drive on those. And that's where a lot of the speed records were set, in England and Florida and other places. So how does the salt surface itself compare to driving on sand?
We got a little nomenclature. We call it gription. It's not just traction, it's gription. It's gription. Bonneville's always wet. Even in August, when it's 120 degrees for 2 weeks, it's still, you kneel down, your knee will get wet. But it's hard, really hard. And you get the traction and you get the flatness, and it's just mile per hour. Yeah, on the sand, yes, it would be very hard. But after a certain amount of time, that was fine up to about 200, 250 miles an hour. But when you are trying to go a little quicker, all of a sudden your foot gets a little more twitchier and you push it down a little more than you should, and the wheels turn and spin. So because there's a finite amount of real estate, you got to get going pretty quick to get something done. They would find that in the sand, it was just a lot of wheel spin. And that's what happened to Malcolm Campbell. He had a car that was going to go 300. He wanted to be the first guy over 300 miles an hour, but he kept throwing all the mile per hour into the into the sand with wheel spin. And it was Ab Jenkins, remember him? He said, oh, Sir Malcolm, please, blah, 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 come here. He, at his own expense, made films and sent it to the Royal Automobile Club to explain to Malcolm Campbell and John Cobb and Easton and Healy and all the boys, come to Bonneville. You don't have to worry about wheel spin at Bonneville. Well, finally, Sir Malcolm acquiesced, came there in 1935, took the thing off the trailer, went 300 miles an hour one way or plus 300 and 300 the other way, ended up setting a record. And I don't know about you, he put it back on the trailer and went home. Now, I don't know, I came all the way from England. Do you think you'd want to drive the thing more than twice? I would.
Well, it worked for him. So, and that kind of put everything on the map. Now, there's a couple of different things that the novice guy might see if he's just watching on television and he sees things about Bonneville. He sees the the jet cars and the big fast guys like that, but there's also the amateur group that comes in a couple times a year.
Ah,
Where's
okay.
the big difference between those two groups? Because that's what people kind of associate with it.
Well, yeah, and see, when Campbell did his thing in 1935 at 300, that kind of put an imprint. Oh, Bonneville is the place. It's the speed laboratory. It's now the fastest place on earth. And for the longest time, it was gentlemen racers. Most of them people, they would drive with white shirts and ties and overalls on. There was gentlemen racers. Eventually, there's a limit. And remember, we were talking, the roads were being built, the car was being developed. All of a sudden, average people were getting it, not just the rich. And there was this crowd of folk in Southern California that just wanted to go fast with various cars. They started their thing of land speed racing at the El Mirage, Dry Lakes, Harper. We know that people would know that today as Edwards Air Force Base. And there were a variety of the Dry Lakes. Well, they would see these magnificent records being set on the salt and said, please, may I come, please, too? Well, it was Jenkins that helped the Southern California Timing Association approach the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce, who was in charge with who could go to the Bonneville Salt Flats and when. And they said, okay, if you boys behave yourself, we'll let you go once. So they saw this as an opportunity to see just how fast they could really go, because that's the whole point of Bonneville. That's the whole point of this book, is they come, every single person in this book, every single person in any book for Bonneville, and any book that's ever going to be written about Bonneville, they come to answer one question: how fast will it go? And at Bonneville, it will tell you.
Yes.
We'll find out.
So how does a race event, they call it a race event at Bonneville, say for an SCTA event, how does that differ from your local drag racing event? You go to Pomona or you go to an oval race. How is it different?
So it's a time trial where any of the other motorsport activities in the planet exist with other people on the track. At Bonneville, you do not race with someone. There are no drag races. When you are on the track, the entire Bonneville Salt Flats is at your disposal. It is your turn down the course, whether that be 1, 7, or 10 miles, however much length you need, you take, and everyone else waits for you. It is your chance to see what you can do. Did you have a good idea? Did you have a bad idea? Did you have an idea that needs a little help? This is where you find out. Every car gets a 2-mile run up from the starting line. You do not need to spin the tires. Just leave and get it going. Bring up your power, bring up your throttle, feel comfortable in the car. At the second mile, there is a timing light. For the faster cars, they have 3 miles to go through, from the 2 to the 3, 3 to the 4, 4 to the 5. And then there's anywhere between 2 to 5 miles of shutdown, where if you're going through that 5th mile light at 400 miles an hour, you need a little bit more whoa space than if you're going 200 miles an hour.
Absolutely.
And then there's the shorter course cars.
When I was out there, and I announced out there for a couple of years, I described it as holding up your hand. If you held up your right hand and tucked in your thumb, whichever way that shows on the Zoom thing, I said the starting line is pretty much as the palm of your hand. And there are different courses. Your pinky, if you face it away from your pinky, is the training course, if you will, where it's a short course. You learn how to pull your parachute, and you learn how to just get up to speed and get comfortable. The other courses were longer, but they all had essentially the same thing. But as they went down the course, they got further and further away.
Yes.
A big reason for that is the safety, I've heard,
Yes.
because there's no fences, there's nothing out there, and there's no grandstands either. You're at a pretty good distance, which makes it difficult for something like Wide World of Sports to go out, which they tried doing a few times, but it's difficult to get good video of the cars.
Unless you put a camera on the car. But
let's put a camera on the car.
I tell anybody on the planet, now, if you go out there in the right time, not by yourself, I am not advocating you go out and do this. But Bonneville is a place where you can go 100 miles an hour and close your eyes for at least 30 seconds at 100 miles an hour and not hit a doggone thing with your eyes closed. Nowhere.
It's an amazing place out there. So what's the big prize? Once you get out there and you get your car and it goes 207, what's your prize? What do you win?
Piece of paper called a time slip.
Says you did it.
And I think, do I have mine?
You've got yours. You wouldn't lose something like that.
Oh, I got it somewhere.
So
But
it's all for bragging rights. Then something you touched on, you said it
it's
earlier.
personal achievement.
Yeah, but you're not racing against anybody. You're racing against the clock. So if you're out there and I'm out there, we have a common enemy, if you will, the clock. That's the thing. Most of the show happens in the pits, right?
Oh, indeed. And Bonneville is the greatest mechanical circus. You don't, and I need to say this, this is very important. Bonneville is not a place for necessarily motorsport people or car people. Bonneville is the place that I expect anybody in America, anybody in the world, to go and walk through the pits and see the most diverse, most incredible patchwork quilt of mechanical ingenuity anywhere on the planet. And you can have 20 different people with 20 different approaches that are all in the same class. And every single one of them think they've got the hot ticket. You just don't know until you leave and go down the road. That's what I like about it. It is very open. It's not all crunched up with all kinds of rules other than safety rules. Every car has to go through a safety inspection and a technical inspection to make sure that it says, if I'm going to be in this class, I'm legally in this class, and I'm not trying to be a cheater and do something that I shouldn't do. So that's the part of it. They're ordinary people with grandiose ideas.
Well, that comes through really well in this book, because it's a picture book with big captions, let's call it, and it's all people. It's more about the people. I mean, the technology is wonderful. You can geek out on that all you want, but it's mostly about this guy and this person. There's also a large generational aspect to this sport.
Yes, yeah. There are only maybe 1 or 2 people left that were there at the first event in 1949. As a matter of fact, one of them is the fellow that wrote the foreword to the book, Alex Exidius. He is 98. He's going to be 99 years old. And if you talk to him, you would think he was 17 years old, not 99. But it is one of those places that when you go there, it takes you forever. You are stunned. You may never get to go back. You will never, ever forget it. I can guarantee you that Neil Armstrong never forgot what it felt like to walk on the moon. When you go to Bonneville, it's basically the same thing that Neil did.
So does the salt care if you're a man or a woman out there on the track?
Oh, I love you, Harold. No, and that's why one of the chapters in the book, and I know we're supposed to maybe read a little bit about that. Maybe I could take the time to do that. There are 3 chapters in this book that are different from the rest. It goes from 1914 to 2020, but there are 3 areas that I've always thought got short-shifted or thrown to the side, so I thought I would shine the spotlight on them. One were motorcycles. So there's a whole chapter just on what the motorcycle two-wheeler folks do. The other is the jet and the rocket cars, because all the hot rod people with their roadsters and pistons, that's not a hot rod, it doesn't have pistons. Yeah, well, I'm sorry. A hot rod is anything that you can make go fast, and you're against the clock. The clock has no clue whether or not it's a piston or a rubber band that you wound up on a stick. So it's a hot rod and what you can make happen. And then the third are women. They do more than hold umbrellas and make peanut butter sandwiches and clean the wheels.
Huh.
Yeah. Okay. And so there's 3 special chapters. You're going to get it, Osmer. You're going to get it. And so that's the case. Oh, and so let me just throw this in here. Advertising alert. I've just been told today by Arcadia Publishing, I've put a proposal in to take the chapter 5, which is about, it says women in helmets in the record books. We're going to take chapter 5 and we're going to turn it into a book, only it's going to be in color. So that's
Wow.
coming, folks, and it's just for
Congratulations.
women.
Terrific. So then what keeps women from doing some of the things that men can do is just the physical strength that's required for this. So now what you're
No,
saying, well,
no.
in general, but so when it comes to land speed racing, then it's not a matter of physical strength as much as it is, you're saying, nerve and that kind of concentration and competitive skill, that type of thing.
Courage and focus.
So these
Really,
cars
if
are,
a car, look,
are
if a
these
car
cars,
is-
are these cars relatively easy to drive?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Look, I got into an argument with Juan Pablo Montoya at an IndyCar race with Castroneves and anyway, the boys on the Penske team, and he went and he did. How much talent does it take to go in a straight line? And I went, not much, honey. I said, but to stay in a straight line at 300 and 400 miles an hour, you better know what you're doing. Don't listen to this old lady. Go talk to a fella. His name is Andretti. You ever met him? You know her? You know him? Go ask Mario about that. And when you get done talking to him, you come back here and apologize to me.
Okay,
And that's
well,
it. It's staying in that straight line because it wants to float and a wiggle and a giggle and scare the pants off you. It will make you pee your pants if you do something wrong.
okay. Speaking of the straight line, when you look at the old footage and stuff that would show up on Wide World of Sports and whatever else, they always had that black line that was always dancing underneath the front of the car. And I understand that was a way for the drivers to know where they were going. I've seen that picture somewhere. So I understand that's a way for the guys to kind of stay on track, as it were.
Right.
But they don't do that any longer. How do the guys stay on track now?
There's two lines. There's one on either side and you stay in the center. Because remember I said you kind of have a float. It's not this white knuckle death grip that you have when you're going down the hill on a roller coaster. It's a finesse. It's a sweetness. You just feel it. And you feel it in your cheeks, and I don't mean the ones by your nose. It's a thought process. You become one with the car. It's just like you can ride your bike or you can ride a sled. Like the people on a luge, you're part of it. And if you're not part of it, you're going to wipe out. So that's what you have to learn at Bonneville, that you're not just the operator, you are part of the entire speed machine and the speed process.
Okay.
And your head goes through a process as well, because the faster you go, the more your mind slows down.
Okay.
This I know.
Because your mind is slowed down now? Really? I wasn't going to say that. But,
No, because the faster I went out there, the slower it was. But
right.
You don't realize, because there's no poles, there's no fences, there's no nothing. You might think, oh, I was going about 150. Yeah, well, when you get back, you're going about 250.
So
It's a big difference. It's a very different feeling.
Today, they lay out these wires for the entire length of the course, and they're able to use that for the timing and whatnot. How did they do it back in, say, Tetzlaff's days? When they're doing the endurance runs in a circle, that's easy enough. When you're going on a straight line.
Stopwatches. They would have a marker put on the course at the beginning and the end, and you would stand near one marker and the other stand at the other, and they would say, okay, he's going, and you would see the flag and you'd hit your stopwatch, and then when the thing got to the end, you hit it again. It wasn't precise, but that's as good as they got.
Right. They had a lot of things to figure out. One of the other things I've wondered about, especially in the early days, how did the guys from, say, SCTA even find Bonneville? It's 640 miles away. You're out in the middle of nowhere before you get to the middle of nowhere.
Well, remember we talked about Mr. Campbell? Well, then from Campbell came John Cobb, came Captain Easton, came Donald Healy, came Goldie Gardner from England. You had Ed Jenkins was making the records. So these guys were making front page news. This was big stuff. These were people that were taking these things that had replaced the horse and buggy. Right. And now they weren't just fun. They were also transporting your goods and you could go to church in one of these things called a car. so that they were becoming something of they were celebrities.
Sure.
So that's how they found out it. And the hot rodders in California, I'll give you a good example. In 1949, when they had the very first event, number of people went, yeah, okay, go up there. That's a long way to go. And that, like you said, 640, but about 700 miles for anybody between the LA and San Diego area. When Alex Exidius and Dean Batchelor did what they did at a little over 200 miles, was it over 200? No, they were at 196 miles an hour. The fastest any hot rod in Southern California or anywhere in the country had gone was about 165. So the fact that these guys flew 30 miles an hour up above on this, they thought, no. But the fellow who was at the clocks, Otto Crocker, he was like the guy. You know, right. There was no lying. There was no fake timing, let me tell you. And this was the real deal. There was a kid who was working at the LA Times in the press, in the press, essentially printing the paper on a daily basis, complete with his little paper hat. And he went to his boss after he heard about what Alex and Dean did. And he said, I need to have this time off next year. I want to put in for vacation right now. And the guy went, get out of here, Thompson, get back to work. And of course, it was at that moment in time, I think, Danny might disagree, but I believe that's when Mickey Thompson became a racer. Because he quit, threw his little paper hat down, walked out of the LA Times, and decided he was going racing from there on out.
Excellent. So there's a lot of divisions in the, let's call it the amateur rankings there. Roadsters, coupes, streamliners, motorcycles. Can you give me a little breakdown on what the heck is the difference in those things?
Yeah, make it easy. They're divided two ways, two major ways, by body style and then by the size or the energy in the engine. So you have roadsters and belly tanks and trucks and cars and roadsters with and without lids, you know, motorcycles, pickup trucks, panel vans. There's even motorhomes. You have motorcycles with fairings on them that are all covered up with plastic. And then you got what they call the naked bikes. And that's a body style. And then you have the size engine, how big or little it is. And then they go down into, well, what kind of fuel does it use? Does it use gas or fuel or nitro? Is it naturally aspirated, or does it have a turbocharger or a supercharger on it? There's even electric. Confusing. Yeah, and then there's electric deals. But don't forget, these are amateur folks, and everybody, the Chevy people are no better than the Ford people, that are no better than the Chrysler people, that are no better than the people who use D-cell batteries. This is their dream. And that's the part that thrills me about these folks. They dream up this idea of how they're going to go fast, and then they build this thing and they make it go fast. And that's the wonder and the joy of it. Nobody knew how to get to the moon when President Kennedy said, we're going to go to the moon and we will safely return someone back to Earth. NASA was going, okay. Nobody had an idea, but they figured it out. And that's the same thing with Landspeed Racing. And in this entire book, every single car in here is handmade. Every single one came with a dream. Every single one either went back with a record, multiple records, or never went back with a record at all. But they all went trying. And these are all average Americans. And I'm very pleased to know a great deal of them. You know, that's why if you love motorcycles, you're going to find a good reason to read this. If you like pickup trucks, there's one in there. If you like sporty cars, I wonder how many people know that Phil Hill and Sterling Moss were out at Bonneville. And because Sterling had to go, Phil Hill went faster than Sterling, and Sterling was the man at the time. And Phil Hill never let Sterling Moss forget the fact that he was faster at Bonneville than he was.
Well, running at Bonneville is different from any other type of racing. For number one, you're mostly going on a straight line. It's a controlled straight line. The other thing I hear people ask about dragsters, and they say, well, you know, they've got these drag racers that'll go 300 miles an hour in a quarter of a mile. You know, what's the big deal about going 300 at Bonneville? And I point out to them, you know, you can go 300 miles an hour in a dragster, sure, in a quarter of a mile. How fast is that car going to be going 5 miles down the road now? And the answer is it won't be, because you get that concentrated energy right then, and it's extremely dynamic and it's very exciting. But when you get it going in a straight line for 5 miles straight, that's quite a different ball game.
Yeah, exactly. So, hey, I wanna read this thing about the chapter 5 about the girls. Can we take a break and do that and let people get an
Sure.
idea?
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So this one is, okay, let me see, put that up. See that? Women in helmets. Don't look at Steve Fawcett. He's in another chapter. So that's the deal. And it's called Speed and Courage, which is genderless. Never has any race car, truck, or motorcycle ever operated differently due to gender. All are equally subservient, responsive only to the person handling each. All vehicles, planes, and boats react the same to input from any driver, pilot, or captain. Good input gets good results. Any inference that gender makes some appreciable difference to the outcome is simply absurd or twisted by trepidation. There is no such thing as a woman's or a man's speed record. It's a record, plain and simple. However, mix in the male ego and prepare to take cover, folks. The idea that a woman can be faster than a man or finish first tends to gnaw at the insecurities of some of them. And it's why ladies were late to the staging lanes in Bonneville. From its start in the 1920s, the sport has always welcomed women to labor for the speed cause, but they were forbidden to decades to take part in the joy of tripping the time clocks on the salty speedway. Most any speedway for that matter. The propaganda was dressed up as fear, real or imagined, that if a woman driver was injured in a race car, then the entire sport would suffer. And if she were a mother, the terrifying perceived consequences made the men shudder. They shook their heads and winced. Oh no, we can't let women drive. Such parochial wisdom eventually was regarded for what it was, nonsensical. Today, women represent a solid, ever-improving group of land speed racers that ink records in any classification they enter. A fine example is Paula Burns, who raced diligently in 2004, and she became the first female SCTA points champion, Southern California Timing Association, for those that don't know the moniker. While drag racing is a very, very close second, no other form of motorsports, professional or amateur, has more gals with skin in the game than land speed racing. This is particularly evident in the motorcycle classes. Quote, I would like to go faster and I would like to have had a higher speed, but the sponsors wouldn't allow it, said Lee Breedlove Frank, recalling her flawless driving of the Spirit of America jet car in 1965. Momentous will be the day when the world speed crown becomes a tiara. I'm waiting, girls, I'm waiting. That leads into chapter 5. And I saw you showing people the pictures.
I was just holding them up there to let you know they're because your book is about Bonneville Salt Flats and the racing that goes on, but primarily it's about the people that are all around it and that type of thing. Now, when you wander through the pits, which it is an open pits during these SCTA events, and there's other groups, and
you can go right up to the starting line. You can walk right up to the cars.
You can walk right up to them and you can see these guys working, and they're from all around the country and all around the world. Most of these guys, what I noticed out there was they might be in communication with one another, the internet and everything else, but they really don't even see one another except there at the Salt Flats. Get some guy in Florida and some guy in Los Angeles and another guy in Sydney, Australia. And all of a sudden they're out there with a common passion and a common goal of all going faster than one another. And
they are a family bound together by speed.
And if you need a 487 fuel pump we put it out there on the PA, and somebody's going to have one, and they'll bring it to you.
That's exactly right. I've had people actually disable their race car, make them non-operative, because someone in the same class as them were closer to the record and had broken something, and they found out and they went, oh no, here. So they disabled their car, couldn't run, gave this thing, whatever it was, to the other people who went and set the record, then took their car apart again and put it back on their car so these people could keep racing. That happens all the time. I'd like to see Chip Ganassi's guys give a part to Roger Penske.
Yeah, they may or may not, but they certainly don't do it in the way that we see out on the salt. Now,
Exactly.
can you run events year round on the salt?
No. The Bonneville Salt Flats right now, as we're talking, are underwater. And the water that was there as a seashore, it used to be many feet deep. And of course, that evaporated, it turned into salt. We can talk about why it's in trouble later. Maybe at the close of this, we'll talk about why it's in trouble. But they have a amount of water that when it rains a lot. And the water will be anywhere from about 2 inches to about almost a foot. And in the winter, that is the healing process, because the wind comes along with the water. And as the wind blows it, it vibrates and it shakes all of the imperfections and all of the ruts and all the things that people have put in there over the course of the summer months. And it flattens it all out again. And then as the temperatures rise and the wind still is there, it's there all year long, it dries out and it becomes this desiccated salt playa. And then there's water underneath as well. And the hotter it gets, the more it draws the salt water up, and that salt water comes and it causes these little bumps and it desiccates, just like you would have a desiccant. And when the racers come, remember I told you it was always wet, they'd come and they'll just smooth it like with a big giant I-beam. It's their form of a spatula, and make it nice and smooth. And that has been going on for, I don't know, about 14,000 years now.
That's a little while.
Yeah.
Excellent. By the way, if anybody's tuned in here has any questions, we can take some questions. You can just type them in, and we'll deal with them straight up like we will anything else. So, who would you say is the first to establish an outright speed record at the Salt Flats?
Oh, Teddy Tetzlaff.
Teddy Tetzlaff.
Yeah, Teddy.
Teddy Tetzlaff. Right?
Terrible Teddy Tetzlaff. But all the guys back in the day when they were driving the cars, they all had nicknames. So he was terrible Teddy. The next guy that came along was Ab Jenkins. And I think Ab would be considered the father of the salt. Nobody did more in a unselfish way that brought nothing to him or his pockets or his holdings.
He was a local guy too, though, right?
What's that?
He was a local guy too, right?
Yeah, a local fella from around the Salt Lake area. He was also elected mayor of Salt Lake, and he never campaigned. They just said, well, if they want me, I'll serve, but that's kind of it. And then his son, Marvin, was also a Landspeed racer. If you've ever heard of the Novi that raced at Indianapolis, they both set records in that. And Ab raced from, oh my gosh, the 20s all the way up until the mid 50s. He died 56 or 57. Oh, and that's something we should talk about.
Okay.
When the next time you see a Pontiac Bonneville, understand that before it was the Bonneville, it was the Series 860, and that was the late 50s. And that was when everybody was trying to make cars something other than, as Marvin put it, and I can't think of anything any better, so I'll just quote Marvin Jenkins. He said, before my dad got a hold of that car, it was just a vehicle for retired ministers. And Dad hopped it up. They set every single closed course record. They absolutely floored the nation. Every automaker was astonished at what Ab Jenkins was able to do. The Pontiac people at GM were so stunned that they decided to honor Ab Jenkins, and they renamed that car in 1957, the Bonneville.
Oh,
and there's actually an Ab Jenkins special Bonneville. I believe, And if anybody listening can tell me otherwise, I need evidence though. None of this claiming without evidence. It is the only car on the planet, not just the United States. And I've been putting this out there to the Germans and the French and the British and the French, especially the French and the Italians. I think it's the only car that ever earned its name and wasn't just given its name by the marketing people. So the Bonneville earned its name by speed.
Excellent, excellent. You know, a lot of things tie into this that, you know, that just you don't ever really think about. You know, all the innovation that goes on, all the different variations in the classes and the people and the whole bit. And there's still so much commonality in the type of person that goes out and does this. Racers in general are problem solvers. You know, if you take away their race car, they're going to go get a boat, or they're going to go build a house, or they're going to do something. These guys just can't sit still. And if you
it's girls, the girls can't sit still either.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to you, but I'm going through it as you're saying that because I'm looking at their faces and the pictures. I know quite a few of these pictures, or these people in the book. The hardest thing was trying to find which one wasn't going to go in. It hurt me when I had to kill somebody's picture because it didn't look as good in black and white.
Well,
I had a better one in another.
You'll get to fix that in the next one. So how many third generation racers are there out there that you're aware of? Is it a handful,
there's more than 4 dozen.
Ah, excellent.
Yeah, more than 4 dozen at very least. And in second generation, dozens and dozens.
Yeah. Second makes sense, but this has been going on for a long time out there. These guys have been going out there, you know, since, you know, let's call it the 40s.
Let me give you an example. Let's see, how do we do this? Okay.
Yeah, just hold it.
See that there?
Look at
That's
that.
Bill Taylor and his wife, Duana. See the little babies there in their hands?
Yes.
Well, they are both fully grown, have their own children, and those kids are about to make, I think they've already made Bill and Duana great-grandparents. So that's where we are in the generational. And here's another good one. You see this? That's John Vesco with Don Vesco teaching him learning. That's Don learning how about engines, a Model B. That little kid right there went on to be the only person to ever own the world land speed record in cars and in bikes. He was the first over 250, 300, and 350 miles an hour on a motorcycle. And even in his death, which was 2003, Don Vesco still owns the world land speed record for wheel-driven cars at 450 miles an hour.
Excellent. Excellent. You know, if there's a piano in the house, chances are the kids will learn to play the piano. If you've got some interesting things going on in the garage, chances are your kids are going to learn that, because kids only learn what they're taught.
Right.
You get people that are involved in, especially Bonneville Salt Flat type of racing, you only do that with a passion.
And you do that with your friends. Like here, this is a good example here. You see these boys? That's the 911 car. Oh, there's some serious fast go boys. But that's the first. This thing is called a roadster, and I call it a flying brick because it's got the aerodynamics of a brick. Dave Davidson and this group of guys right here were the first ones to figure out how to make a brick go 300 miles an hour. They have my ultimate respect.
Excellent, excellent.
Oh, and this is another one. You see, these are friends. You see these two?
Yeah.
That's McDonald and Pitts. Now, I want you guys to look. The one fellow has a fire suit, just the top, and the other fellow has the fire suit, just the bottom, and they're fighting over the helmet because they only have one fire suit. And they became partners. And the reason this picture is so silly, because in all the 25 years of being partners, they never had an argument. So I made them argue over the helmet that never happened. Dave only went to get fuel records on fuel, and Lionel only went after the gasoline records. So that's how fun, and that gives them, it's better than going golfing. I'm going to get in trouble for that. So
not with me, you won't.
And here's a third generation. You were talking about third generation. Let me show you.
There we go.
See the guy in the white t-shirt?
Okay.
That's Larry Volk. He's been racing out there since the 50s. See the guy in the black t-shirt? He's
Okay.
the father of the girl sitting on grandpa's roadster, putting on her grandfather's fire suit. And I'm sitting in the truck taking the picture with mom. And she's okay, sort of maybe with her daughter going out there and racing the car. But that's a good example of third generation. They were
Right.
all out there to help Megan go fast.
Sure.
Better than Pancake Day.
And then up there, but close to Chaucer's books in Santa Barbara,
Oh,
there's a lot of history up that way too. I mean, Mendenhall built that, the Landspeed.
the gasoline museum of
And that's in Gilson,
Speed.
yeah. Which
And
is
then also right in closer to home in Goleta, this thing was born and raised, and this is Seth and Tanis Hammond's car. This was the exact car when Tegan, their daughter, decided she wanted to do exactly what Mama and Daddy did, go over 300 miles an hour. Now, how many families you know that have one car that Daddy built in his garage that went 300? Mama went 300 first, Daddy went 300 second, daughter went 300, then the brother went 300. I mean, all in the same car.
Yeah.
All in the same car.
You know, family that races together stays together.
Indeed. And that's not the only one. This is another family here. Whoops, right there. See all those people? They're also family as well as friends. The bottom line is you can't do this by yourself. Even if it's a motorcycle, you need help. And it is an opportunity to go out and be in this spectacular place and to be part of something that you could never be by yourself. And many of these cars, like for instance, the Hammonds are not exclusive. Almost every single race car at Bonneville has been driven by many different people.
Sure.
And they want them to do it because everybody donates their time. There are a few that get paid to go out there. That's true. There's a few wealthy folks that have that ability to pay to make their dream come true, mainly because they don't know how to do it otherwise. And frankly, if they picked up a tool, I'd be a little concerned about what they did with it. So it's better they pay somebody to make it go straight. You know, because you ain't lived until you've seen a 300-400 mile an hour come near you out of control.
Well, there's a couple of ways to get involved with the Bonneville Salt Flats. And one of them is to go up there during an event and watch it. Another is to find a neighbor somehow. I'm sure you can find the internet and find somebody in your neighborhood or your town who's maybe involved in this sort of thing. And you can do that. Another way to do this is go on to Chaucer's books and find this from Arcadia Publishing. It is.
Read this first.
How are you going to forget? It's the Bonneville Salt Flats, but it's a great way to witness the events at Bonneville. It's about
Right.
the people, about the
Right.
cars. It's about the whole thing, and it comes through really well. Landspeed, I've known you for a while, and I tell you, I'm always impressed with your work. And this one, I was real happy to get, and it's terrific. I really enjoy it.
What did you learn that you didn't know, and what made you the most joyful about reading this book?
Oh, geez. There's so much that I figured out in here. It's hard to pin it down, because it covers such a wide range. It's like I got a 200 mile an hour record. Okay, and what kind of car? What kind of this and that? There's so many divisions to run there, and that's what I noticed about it was it's not a big long. I have to read 4 pages to understand that one photo. No, here's the photo. Here's the explanation. Wonderful. Move on. Oh, another
Thank
thing.
you. Thank you. That's what I tried to do.
That's what I got from it. And
Okay.
I've got a little bit of understanding about what goes on at the Salt Flats and how it happens. So it appealed to me, yeah, greatly. I see Michael's back on here. He's gonna yell at you in a minute.
No, I see it. But the big thing, what I tried to do, and I'm cutting you off and I apologize. I tried to take every picture as though it was the only picture they would see. And I tried to make every caption a teeny tiny, eeny weeny story that had a beginning, an end, and a juicy middle. Oh, like an Oreo.
You did a fine job, Louise.
That was the whole idea, because that book wasn't for you. That book was for like Michael and the people that walk into Chaucer's books every day that have never been to Bonneville, will never go to Bonneville, but it's like the International Space Station. Well, we're never going to go to the ISS. but it sure is cool to know about it. And I'd like to know what they do up there. And it would be cool to have a book to explain and teach me a little bit about it. That's what I wanted to do with this book. And you
succeeded.
told me it worked. How about you, Michael? Have you had a chance to look at that?
I did. And you know, what touched me was like the Hammonds and some of the local people. It's like, I knew those people. But what I really liked about tonight is your description of being at one with your car, with the vehicle and feeling it. If you're not like that, it's like luge, being a bicyclist. I feel the same way about a bicycle. If you're not like at one with, then you're going to crack up, or it's not going to go very well for you. But
do you know that there's a bicycle record on the Salt?
Yes, like 200 something miles an hour or something like that,
No.
which is crazy.
Oh, and by the way, I want you to notice something. You see that right here? You see this?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know who that is?
Who is that?
Can you see that? Hold on. I put it up just for you. Hold on.
Oh, wow. Is that Gary?
That's Gary Gablich in the Blue Flame.
Oh, wow. That
There's
is
the
amazing.
car. That's it.
That's my childhood right there, Louise.
Well, that's my next book for the University of Utah Press. I'm working on it now with
All right.
With Gary's widow and his son, and with the builder of the car and the guy that did the engine. So I'm writing the Blue Flame story. When we get that
All
done,
right.
I'll let you know.
Yeah, and we'll do another event. I thank you for coming out and doing this, Louise. And Harold, you were an amazing Q&A. I might have to hire you again for something else, so you'll have to brush up on a different subject. But I may hit you up for that, okay? Thank you both. And everyone, please, if you haven't already bought Bonneville Salt Flats, please do, either through Chaucer's or through your local bookstore. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice evening.
Thank
Good
you for
night.
having me. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.